Hi, everybody. My name is Ryan Wilson. If you don't know me, I'm the director of Team Trust Productions. Now, I have a disability, and I admit there's a lot I don't know about the disability community and, quite frankly, humans as a whole. So, here's a conversation I had in hopes of collectively, you and me, better understanding ourselves and our connection with each other. So, welcome everybody to Team Trust Inclusion Podcast. So, today, of course, we're featuring, like as always, people doing big things for and with the disability community. And so, we're joined by Chris Zagala and Jenna Reardon. Chris is the Chief of Staff and GM of Digital Quality Management for Crown Peak, kind of a big wig. And Jenna Reardon, live from her kitchen, as the co-founder and senior VP of Customer Solutions for Illumino. Thank you guys for joining us. Really appreciate it. And so our audiences may not be familiar with Crown Peak and Illumino, but Chris, I guess, could you give us a brief overview of Crown Peak and what its main purpose is?
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Ryan, and it's great to be here. So I appreciate you hosting the podcast here. So quickly on Crown Peak, and you mentioned my role there at Crown Peak. I've been with the company just under 4 years, and the business line that I'm responsible for, digital quality management, is a technology solution, really helping organizations improve their digital experiences with specific modules around accessibility, compliance and optimization, and things around SEO and usability and brand compliance as well. So Crown Peak as a whole is a digital experience company. So we have multiple pieces that go into that objective of improving digital experiences for our clients. One of which is a content management system. So the technology to manage and host websites on behalf of our clients. The digital quality management piece that I just described, that's really focused around improving the inclusion and accessibility of digital experiences for our clients. And then we have a product line in the privacy management space that's focused on delivering compliance with global regulations like the GDPR and CCPA laws from a privacy perspective. So a unique blend of compliance and optimization technologies and solutions, coupled with kind of core website infrastructure and management technologies to kind of bring unique value adds in terms of how customers manage and deploy, complex websites and ecosystems.
Okay, very cool. And Jenna Illumino, I guess, could you provide some light on the overall mission of Illumino?
Sure. Well, we light the path to digital accessibility, short and sweet.
I like it. And so I know Crown Peak and Illumino recently announced a partnership. I'm kind of curious as to what that means and what it will look like going forward.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate the question, and I'll let Jenna chime in here too.
Sure.
But Jenna and I actually met going on just about 2 years now. Jenna and I kind of came together with a like-minded view of the market around digital accessibility and really the challenges that we were seeing in the market for customers to do this type of work well and effectively and efficiently at global scales. So that it was sort of respective to each part of our businesses. We were viewing the same problem, just from a different lens, so to speak. And what really kind of lined up well, and where the stars aligned in terms of what we both do and how they complement one another, is I think of, in a simple way, Crown Peak is technology, and Illumino is consulting and expert services. And when you combine those two in a more seamless and integrated way, you're able to deliver just much better outcomes and value for the client, as opposed to taking these kind of siloed approaches to technology and services and consulting and implementation. But to do that cohesively with one kind of joint offering just creates a lot of value and efficiencies for the market. And so to get to specifics, right, Crown Peak, as I mentioned, is technology focused. It's a software tool that essentially, if I could just kind of explain how it works quickly, it's a scanning solution. So it works very similar to a search engine in that we point our scanner or crawler at any public-facing URL, and it can scan those websites, collect the information and data associated with that website, and identify issues, so to speak, or violations on that site relative to the underlying code and any set of policies or standards that we want to apply. And in the case of digital accessibility, we're referencing, the WCAG guidelines, right? So we're identifying issues on that site that are in violation of those best practices. And we're doing that from an automated perspective. So quickly and efficiently running the technology to identify those gaps. Where we see the huge value and complement with bringing Illumino together with a solution like that is delivering that human element to how you encompass all of what is required for true, full digital accessibility and inclusive experiences. So there are elements of the guidelines, the WCAG guidelines, that to date just aren't achievable through pure technology and automated approaches, and do require that expert view, that human-led testing and review to identify those gaps and develop the remediations and the process around how you shore up those items. So that's a natural complement of technology plus services and human-powered testing that delivers a full end-to-end complete solution for clients.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I feel like most people are familiar with ADA and what it means from a design standpoint, adding ramps, elevators, and different sorts of modifications to a structure. But Jenna, I'm kind of curious, how would you define digital accessibility?
Great question. So I would define digital accessibility as creating an equally enjoyable online experience for everyone that doesn't remind someone that they're left out. And that's what we really strive to do at Illumino, to give some more depth to our services and our company. There's a set of guidelines called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, which try to emulate similar requirements such as wheelchair ramps, but they're not as specific, and it's hard to associate them with technology sometimes. So they're written way before technology was created the way it is today with haptics or whatever type of features we have. So there's a constant game of catch up that we're playing. And sometimes we can get caught in the checklist approach of the WCAG guidelines of going through a list without, ironically, considering the human aspect of it. And that's where myself and my team are really passionate about digital accessibility, and the human element of it is actually looking at it from the perspective of, is something usable, enjoyable, and a great experience, really. So that's how I define it. If you remind someone that they have an impairment or there's a issue processing their website, then you failed, is a quote that I heard paraphrased from someone else that I really love. And it's truly a failure, and we are failing people if we're not meeting that goal. And to build on what Chris said, as far as the partnership here, it's been really empowering for us and for our team. I've been in the field for many years, as well as senior experts at our team, and we've tested and tried and many automated tools and solutions, and they don't work. And they don't work for two key reasons. And one is there's a lack of transparency in what the tool does. And then there's a lack of customer support. So businesses are often left with a sense of false security. they're paying a lot of money for tools and not really sure how to use it. So it was kind of magic when we met the Crown Peak team in that they really align with us in our methodology of, despite being more of an automated solution, a tool, they focus on the human aspect and how that tool aligns with the human aspect of it. So when we come together, we're really delivering the same end goal to our customers and are able to focus more on the business, because we're talking about businesses, and it could be a 2-person real estate firm or a global CPG firm. At the end of the day, you have customers who are people. So when we bring our solutions together, it's really focused on how do we help the business, how do we help the person at the end of the day, and we're able to create some really cool results with that.
Okay.
So
Yeah. So then when somebody or a business is creating a website, how do they know if it's going to work for a wide and diverse audience? Like, what sort of things do they need to add?
Yeah, I'll start, and Jenna, this is her bread and butter, but that's a great way to frame it, in that I often refer to what we do as helping people along a digital accessibility journey, right? Because there is no quick fix, there is no magic wand as it relates to creating a fully accessible experience. And oftentimes we get the opportunity to start working with organizations very early in their journeys. So that question of, hey, I have a website, how do I get started? How do I know what I need to do and what those issues could look like, right? So that's where we start our work, right? Is starting to orient the customer and those individuals who are tasked with that type of project to understand what the problem is with not having an accessible website. Why is that bad for you as a business owner, as a website operator? Like, what are the missed opportunities? What are the risks associated with that? To put that in context as to why there is a need to go and solve those problems. And then it becomes a function of building that, so to speak, program. And so what does that program look like? What are the components of a very effective accessibility program? And it all starts with visibility, right? The ability to see those issues, to understand what the issues are, why they impact users, and what the various considerations are around the types of individuals that have challenges with certain aspects of different issues. All those nuances go into that first view of like a visibility inventory report of where you stand today, your current state relative to delivering a fully inclusive experience. And that's where the work begins, right? Once you understand and have the visibility of what your current state looks like, you can begin the process of planning and executing on making those fixes.
Okay. And then, so then as you're making these changes, what are some of the most common aspects or elements of a website that people miss when they're trying to make it accessible, but then they forget about this one important element? What are the typical things that are missed?
I can take that super high level, but we're starting to see people adopting some of the basics, which has been really great. So people are starting to think about, do I have the right color contrast, or am I light blue on light blue? Am I writing the right alt text? So not Shutterstock image 1, 2, 3, 4, but this is an image of 3 people sitting on a Zoom call. So we're starting to see a trend where people are starting to fit some of those basics into their workflow. But that's a really great question. I mean, we see trends all the time of people coming to us with hey, I made my site accessible. Can you just give me the thumbs up? And there's still the very basic things being missed. Some common things we see are moving content. The infamous homepage sliding banner is something that's really trendy in design right now. So that's one that people often leave out, is if we have people with seizure disorder or just motion sickness, or I want to read the page and focus, then that's a big one. we get a lot of people that focus on testing and building an experience for one certain type of person or assistive technology. So my website works perfectly with JAWS. Well, we'll test the website and there's still a ton of issues where you may have left out any type of cognitive impairment. So maybe how we move through the main navigation of clicking home or filtering or sorting our products, those types of things. We get into silly little things like, let's say we're buying a food product, grams or weights of food won't read properly on the screen reader. So it's the little nuanced things that we're not thinking about because you operate in your own experience. So if you're a developer or designer, you're working in your world and what maybe limited user testing you have done. So it's more the holistic experience that we're seeing missed. It's one certain workflow being tested, but not accommodating everyone.
Yeah.
And the way, just to add to that, putting some perspective on how I view that issue, right? It's a retrofitting issue. Like a lot of the challenge that the market faces today is there's a existing infrastructure, existing website experience, however you want to frame it. There's a digital thing, right? That sits in the market today that we're trying to go retroactively address from an accessibility standpoint. And those challenges that come with that around how do you kind of fit a square peg into a round hole are prevalent everywhere, right? That's the problem, right? Is how do I take what I have and change it to be something that it wasn't intended to do from the outset, right? So this ultimate problem of how do you bring more of this consideration earlier into the development process, the design process, the actual creation of these digital experiences, so that as they're being built with those individuals, those end users in mind, right? And the accessibility of that experience in mind, so that when you build the building, you're designing from the beginning how those features and interaction points are going to be used from the individual's point of view, as opposed to looking at a building, 10 years after it's been built and thinking, how do I change the structure to fit what I'm trying to do from this narrow perspective, right? So that's the ultimate challenge, I think. And as we evolve and, organizations become more aware and, sort of bought into the value around doing this, they'll begin to bring more of that activity and that perspective earlier into the process, so that we're not playing a catch-up game and we're being proactive about how we address these problems from the get-go.
Yeah.
Chris, that is a great point. I can't help but build on for a minute there, Ryan. But
Oh, you're fine.
it answers a lot of your other questions. I mean, to what Chris said, that's where our approach is really unique and maybe call it a bit uncomfortable. But we're not looking at accessibility here. We're looking at it through the pipeline and through the process. And, we ask people, we need access to your code. We need to understand your development process. And it's, wait, we just hired you for an accessibility audit. But as Chris was saying, if you don't fix the root cause of the issues, then you're going to constantly have a problem. And one cool example is we worked with an organization, had thousands of websites and partners with a requirement for how they used Honeypot. So for years, they had a requirement, they fixed the requirement at the end, I don't know, probably hundreds of times over and over. And we got into the issue. It was an hour-long call that we resolved a new criteria for it and changed the way that they work around that issue. So it can be as simple as that when you look at it upstream, as Chris was saying. So great point, Chris. Thanks.
Yeah.
So I'm getting the impression there might be some resistance then to making web content, digital content accessible. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it's the natural kind of push and pull from a business perspective of these are sunk costs to a certain extent, right? There's been an investment made to deploy these experiences. Oftentimes it's, the concept of starting from scratch or going back to the beginning and having to sink dollars at the end of the day into something that has already been built can have challenges, right? And considerations around what those benefits are. So that's, I think, the natural resistance is why do I need to do this, one, right? And then two, like, is there a cost-effective way to do it in a way that gets us to the same outcome? So there might be shortcuts or, narrow views of, hey, let's just fix something on the front end. We don't need to worry about the process leading up to this, right? So it's a longer term investment in horizon and kind of orientation to do what's most sustainable and most effective over the long term. But I think as humans, right, we are constantly battling near-term priorities versus long-term success and optimizing for that kind of state. So I think that's the natural push and pull. I think there are those driving forces in the market today that is increasingly swaying people towards maybe lowering those friction bars, right? Whereas in the past, maybe risk from a legal perspective wasn't as palatable. The missed opportunity around, excluding populations of users by not doing these activities correctly wasn't as evident, basically in a pandemic world where digital was one channel, not the only channel. Those sort of kind of evolutions in the market have definitely kind of continued to raise awareness and drive adoption. So those friction points, I think, are still there, but they've sort of been flexing a bit, right?
Yeah, okay. And so kind of running out of time, but I imagine there are some success stories of businesses maybe feeling a little hesitant to jump on board with digital accessibility, and then they do, and they see this massive growth and success opportunity. Have you heard any stories kind of like that?
I'll let you jump in, Jenna, but the one that I love is, it's fairly simple, but it just speaks to the value to me at the end of the day. We did work with a client, with a large client. They have hundreds of websites, but we were very focused on a set of 4 or 5 websites to start a project. We identified all the issues they had on these websites. We put together the program and the plan of how they would reduce those issues. They did that over a short time period. And just in that project alone, they were able to measure the impact to site traffic to that website from that specific change. There was no other changes going on that website over that time period. So it was very sort of attributable impact to these accessibility focused projects. And they saw a 75% increase in traffic in 6 months to those websites. So there's all these like huge benefits. It's not just, hey, you're doing the right thing, which is obviously super important and critical, but they actually saw, by doing these changes, making a more accessible website, that their SEO values were increasing. They're showing up more in search. They were driving more people to the website, which had knock-on effects of conversion and customer loyalty and value over time. And that was all from a 6-month project of just identifying and fixing issues, right? And so I think people, maybe there's this friction point around, it's almost so daunting, right? I have thousands of problems on my website. It's been coded in a way that we've done for decades and decades. I don't want to go back and change that process. But if you just start small and focus on very specific cases where you can make impact, you can start to extrapolate what that could mean for a larger project over time. And it's those small wins that I think gives the business a ton of confidence that this is the right thing to do, not just from a brand and sustainable perspective, but for the bottom line.
Mm-hmm. And Jenna, I imagine you've heard similar stories too, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, it's all about removing the friction, and that's something that we are super passionate about. And it's with anything, it's just not generally accepted in the industry yet. So how do we have the conversation so we're all speaking the same language and opening the conversations to designers? Accessibility is not black and white. There are other ways to do things than just make it darker. And having those conversations is just the start of removing that friction. I think there's the client-facing and the customer-facing wins and success stories, but there's also the cultural and the internal success stories, and those are really huge for us as well, is removing those friction points and having a product lead at a company come to us and say, how do I do this? How do I implement this into as part of my process, not an extra layer in my process? And those are really the big wins for us, because if you can change a culture within an organization, you're changing the driving force of what ultimately gets to the customer at the end of the day. So for us, it's, we're very big on our branding and the Crown Peak by Illumino, and we'll get a call that says, illuminate me. How do I do this? Like that is the big success for us. So there's stories we would need 5 hours for, but I think we've seen a lot of really good things, and that's what makes it fun to get up every day and do what we do, because businesses are really coming around, teams are, individuals are, and we're starting to see some of those drivers, which has been great.
Sure. All right. Well, Jenna and Chris, I really appreciate your joining me on this Inclusion podcast. I am kind of curious, Jenna, before we go, is it snowing where you're at?
I noticed that right in the background. We are late to fall here in Cincinnati.
Okay.
So you're seeing the first few leaves fall off the trees.
Okay.
And you can see the pile starting in my backyard. So that'll be a project this or next weekend for sure.
Okay, good. Well, I feel a little bit better now that it's not snowing in Cincinnati. So, all right. Well, thank you again for joining us, and stay tuned for more Inclusion podcast episodes.
This has been great, Ryan. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, it was great.